Okay, good morning everybody. My name is John Geib. I'm a Master Gardener. I've been a Master Gardener for about 8 years now. I got my formal training over in Midland before I transferred over here a couple of years ago. I am a vegetable specialist, at least before they changed the name of the specialist program. So we're going to be talking today about winter gardening and fall gardening and all the good fun stuff that we get to deal with on that. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be focusing strictly on fall and winter gardening. This is not a Gardening 101 style course. This is strictly focusing on the fall version of it. Don't worry, we've got programs you can watch on that for the little bit more of the basic stuff. We're going to talk about how we can take the summer season, extend it a little bit into the fall and winter so that we can have some of that summer stuff that we like into the fall. And then extending that further and being able to grow food throughout a lot of the winter around here. And it also gets to be, fall's the wonderful time when you're talking about gardening to actually be able to go out in the garden, enjoy the garden, and not die of heat stroke. So, I mean, it's fun. Now, Master Gardeners now have a YouTube channel. It is the Big Country Master Gardeners. All of our programs that we have here from the library that we've been doing since it was December or January, I can't remember which. I think it was December is when we started. All of those are on our YouTube, and so you can go back and watch those. The January version was the Vegetable Gardening 101. So if you have questions about setting up your garden, soil problems, all sorts of stuff, a lot of that is handled in that program, which is why I'm not going to cover it today. I'm just going to strictly worry about fall gardening and how to extend that season into the winter. Okay, the Abilene Public Library, which is listed on YouTube as AP Library, also has the website which has all of the videos online also. Okay, a lot of you have been here before, especially to my vegetable gardening, so you've probably seen the next 4 slides. There's 5 main problems that we have here when we're talking about gardening in West Texas. We've got the weather, the water, the soil, the water, and the weather. All right? First one's the weather. We have exceedingly hot summers, as you all remember from July. July's average high temperature was 103, I believe, which is absolutely insane. But the average temperature for the whole day and for the whole month was somewhere in the mid-90s. It never cooled off during July. It was just brutal. Those of us that have summer gardens, we're doing everything we could to try and keep the garden alive. Most of it didn't survive, but some of it did. But it was just a real struggle through the summer. Okay? Then fall comes around, short fall usually, but not too bad. Then we start getting into the winter seasons, and we do get very, very cold temperatures, sometimes in the order of single digits. Officially, we're in 8A zone, which tells us that the winter temperatures are going to be in the teens or so for the lows. But every couple of years, about every 5-10 years, we'll end up with single digits and occasional sub-zero temperatures. That's hard to garden in. But for the most part, the summer or the winter section is not really too bad for a winter to garden in. Okay, it does have cold nights, but we do have fairly warm days and a fair amount of sunshine. One good thing about it also, because of the way our heat patterns are, we have a summer growing season of about 205, 210 days. Just depends on the season. So we get a lot of sunshine to grow in. Water, the last week and a half where we got anywhere from 3 to 5 inches of rain is absolutely great. Problem was we had gone almost a year with less than 5 inches of rain. So our water around here coming from the sky is very hit or miss. We want to make sure that we're going to plan for this when we talk about gardening and irrigating the crops to make sure that they continue to grow. Because without the water, those plants aren't going to grow to their full potential. Okay. The other thing we have to worry about is when we do get the rain, it's usually in spurts of 2 and 3 inches in a day. So that can actually throw some real havoc, especially on plants like tomatoes. Soil's the next big problem. We have usually pretty high pH soil, usually runs around 8 for most people's soil, unless they're amending it a lot. That gives some problems with nutrient deficiencies for most of our gardens. But if we're doing the garden stuff, we're usually amending the soil quite a bit and taking care of the major problems that we have, which is our type of soil, which if you live on Abilene or south, for the most part, it's clay. If you live north of Abilene, a lot of places you'll run into sand. So it's very, very poor soil for actually growing in. So we're needing to that usually with compost is going to be the best thing for that. To help, it'll stiffen up the sand to the point where it can actually hold some moisture. It'll break up the clay so it can actually lose some of the moisture and actually not become concrete. And it helps allow some of that pH balance to go a little bit lower, closer to 7, if you're adding enough compost to it. Water quality, most of us in here are going to be probably watering on city water, which isn't too bad. I mean, it's a little bit high in total dissolved solids, which is salts. It's okay. It also does have chlorine in it and some ammonia products to help sterilize everything and keep the pipes clean so we don't end up with any bacterial problems. Not the best thing for gardens, but it does work. If you can get rainwater, that's the best thing. Do rainwater capture and water your plants that way. The other thing, if you live out in the country, a lot of times you're going to be on well water instead of city water. Well water by nature has a lot more total dissolved solids in it, so it's a lot saltier water, so we have to take that into account while we're doing our gardening. The other weather issue is extremes. This could be the winds that we get around here. I live out on the south side of town, far enough out that there's no big buildings or anything blocking the wind. I consistently will get, winds blowing across my property, 15, 20 miles an hour. If I put a seedling out in that, it's going to just eat that poor plant alive. So I have to take, precautions to make sure I can block some of that wind. The other thing we have is when the rain does come, it usually comes with hail. Hail can absolutely destroy your crops. I had a season, I think it was 16, beautiful spring crop coming up. Tomatoes, I was looking like I'd get 400 or 500 pounds of tomatoes coming out of my garden. I had 15 minutes of nickel-sized hail. Those tomatoes that weren't actually destroyed right out with chunks taken out from the nickel-sized hail, every other tomato I had on the vine at that time got bruised and rotted on the vine before it could ripen. I mean, it was just devastating on my, but that's one of the things we have to watch out for. Not a whole lot you can do with the severe weather like that, but you just kind of have to understand that is a possibility. So, what can we grow in the winter? Well, not quite the right question. Correct question is, what should we grow first? Okay? When you're planning your garden out, what do you eat on a regular basis in your diet? Do you eat rutabagas? Do you eat carrots, green beans, peas, corn? If you don't eat it on a regular basis, don't grow it. Don't waste the time, energy, and space in your garden to grow something that you are going to eat. Okay? If you want to try something, dedicate a small area of your garden to it, grow a couple of plants. Other thing, go to the store, buy the oddballs that you don't normally buy, figure out how, if you're going to like to eat them, and then if you decide you like them, go ahead and plant them, okay? That's just one of those things. If there's no point in wasting your energy on something you may or may not eat, okay? Next thing, if you're doing in-ground gardening, we have to plant varieties that will be able to grow in the soil that you have, which includes the high pH and probably the high clay content. So we have to think about that. Most of the varieties can handle the weather around here as long as we're planting at the right time of year for them. Some do better than others. When we're talking cold crops, the big thing that we have to worry about is heat, believe it or not. Our winters can get to the point where we actually do have 75, 80 degree temperatures in December and January, which if you're growing something like broccoli or lettuce, a lot of times that's hot enough for it to bolt And once that bolts, which is when it starts putting out a flower stalk so it can reproduce, the flavor changes on that plant drastically. Usually becomes very bitter, and we don't want to eat it after that. So that's something we're going to have to take into account. Now, when we're talking about what can be grown, well, we've got summer crops still in the ground, hopefully, if they've survived. We can plant crops that like cooler temperatures, all right? Not necessarily the ones that love a lot of heat, but the ones that can stand heat, but also a little bit of cooler temperatures. Our long season crops are going to be planted here shortly, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then the cold weather crops, which are the ones that can really survive throughout the winter. Now, when we're talking summer crops, tomatoes, if you have been able to keep your tomatoes alive, doesn't matter how sickly they look right now, but if they're still alive, now's the time they're going to start looking better. My guess is in the last 2 weeks with all the rain and the cooler temperatures, tomato plants if you've got tomato plants that survive, they're starting to look a whole lot better than they were last month, okay? They might actually start setting fruit now again. During the heat of the summer, tomatoes actually cannot set fruit when the temperatures aren't dropping below about 76 at nighttime on a consistent basis. You literally will actually kill the flowers with that type of heat. So, once it starts cooling down enough, like it's been doing the last week, we might actually start getting flower set on the tomatoes. So we might get a good fall crop out of the tomatoes. Just have to remember that if a tomato sees a freezing temperature, it dies. So we have to watch out for that. Short length crops. We have, I think it's 54 or 55 days right now before our official our first frost is supposed to happen on average. Now then, you look at some of the crops that I have listed, squash, green beans, corn. We have 50 and 55 day varieties of these crops that if we get it in the ground soon, like this week, we can actually get harvest before that first frost date. So this is what we're trying to do. Take a summer crop, which likes all the heat that we've been getting, and just push it as hard as we can until we can get some fruit off of it. Cool weather crops. Now, when we're talking cool weather crops, these are ones that don't quite like the heat so much, okay? Cucumbers. I've had my cucumbers plants, I've been amazed this year. They've actually survived the entire summer. They have produced cucumbers at least one a week. I have not eaten any of them. They are horribly bitter. Those all go to the chickens. They love them. But coming fall now, it's cooling off a lot of that stress that's going into that plant. I'm expecting some really good cucumbers here coming up in the next couple weeks. So it's, they like the cooler temperatures. They can't stand 100-degree heat. Carrots. Carrots are one of our cool season crops. They like a little bit of heat, but not much. And so they'll grow really well right now. And we've got enough time to plant in and get some good crops for the carrots. Potatoes. Potatoes we can plant twice a year here. First planting is on Valentine's Day. That's the easy way to remember to plant your spring potatoes. The other one is right about middle of September, if I remember right. I've got one of the sheets that I handed out that shows plant dates will give you when you should be planting the potatoes. But it's right about now. And so we can get in a good crop of potatoes in the fall because they can handle a little bit of the cooler weather. Plants that can take a light frost are another ones that we want to really try and plant on right now. These things are a lot of the leafy plants like spinach and lettuce. Peas do really well right now. Broccoli does really well. If at least it's started now for the broccoli. Things like the broccoli, they're going to try and bolt if it gets too hot. So we have to be careful about what variety we're planting for that. Okay. A lot of these plants, the kale, the lettuce, the spinach, and broccoli, they really actually taste a whole lot better if you can actually get some frost onto those plants. There's a chemical process that once that plant has actually had a little bit of frost on it, it changes the way the plant reacts to everything. Tastes much, much sweeter, much better. So these are the ones we're going to want to try and get in the ground fairly soon. Our long season crops, okay, these are onions and garlic. Garlic is about a 9-month process to harvest. So we plant it now for a June crop. Once it gets into the June area, your garlics just can't take the heat, so they're going to die out. So we want to get them in the ground now so they have enough chance to grow over the winter. Onions are the same way if you're planting by seed. Anybody ever plant the 1015 onions that Texas A&M created years ago? Okay. The 1015 onion, the reason they were called 1015 onion is because you plant the seeds 1015, October 15th. So that's when you plant the seeds to get them out and have them harvest out at the right time. The one thing to think about with the onions, we want short day onions, not long day onions, when we're looking for varieties. Long day onions to not bulb out quite as well if you aren't careful. You know, it just depends on the weather. Sometimes you might be able to get some bulbs out of them, but for the most part, we're looking for short day onions when we're talking onions. Onions and garlic will handle the wintertime very well. A little bit of straw over top of them, especially in the dead of winter, helps a little bit. Keeps, you know, the tops might freeze off, but the bulb and everything else usually holds up pretty good. We have another snowpocalypse coming up. So, all right, cold crops. These are the ones that can actually take a full light freeze. Now, what's the difference between a freeze and a frost? Anybody know? No. Temperature. Freeze is officially defined as air temperatures at 28 degrees Fahrenheit. That's when the Weather Service actually puts out the bulletins that we have a freeze coming as opposed to a frost. Frost can happen as high temperatures as 35 degrees. Okay, so when we're talking about frost, you know, there's a chance for a frost. It may not be 32 degrees, but we may be getting frost, and that frost on the plant can do damage, especially on things like tomatoes. So anytime temperature's starting to get cold, we want to watch out for it. But these are the plants that can actually handle full freezes. Some of the lettuces, depending on the variety, don't handle very well, but the rest of them usually can take full freezes without too much problem. They may get a little bit of burning on the edges, but they'll come right back and you're good to go. So, strawberries are one of the more interesting ones. Everybody plants strawberries in the spring. Strawberries should not be planted in the spring. If you're looking for a crop next spring for strawberries, now is the time to be planting your strawberries. If you can plant them in the fall, a month or so before first frost, gives that a good time to establish a good root system. It will build that root system over winter, and then when it comes in times for spring, you've got a huge, massive, healthy plant ready to just get lots and lots of strawberries next year. So I know the master gardeners are thinking about, I don't know if they've been able to get strawberries for our fall garden. They did get them, Karen? Do you know?
They've ordered them out.
Okay, yeah.
It all humming to get in.
Yeah. So, you know, at our fall garden sale for the master gardeners, we will be having strawberries, so if you want to get them, you can. The problem is nobody else has them around town. Nobody thinks about planting them in fall like they should. So, now, when we're talking about season, there's two versions of it, short-term and long-term, okay? Short-term is just that. It's an overnight cold spot. We just keep the plants okay. Next day, it's supposed to be up in the 60s or 70s, and we're just trying to keep that plant from getting any frost damage on it overnight, okay? Usually we can do this by just simply covering the plant somehow. You can do these with like frost cloth, which you can buy at most of the garden stores. Frost cloth is a very thin, usually white fabric-like material. It allows a fair amount of air through, but it does not allow too much, and it gives about 2 or 3 degrees worth of protection to prevent the plant from freezing up in case of, you know, a light frost. I'm cheap. I don't buy the expensive stuff from the store. I go with the easier alternatives of blankets and sheets, usually picked up either the old ones that we have at the house that we were going to get rid of, Or we go out to Salvation Army and buy from their store and Goodwill, that sort of stuff. You know, you can buy them for, you know, quarter, 50 cents a lot of times. Go out to garage sales, buy these linen materials, and a lot of times just tossing those over your plants will do very good at keeping that a couple of degrees warmer. Now, if you're looking for a little bit better frost protection, things like 5-gallon buckets are, you know, beautiful ways. You know, you've got a nice, fairly decent sized plant. As long as it fits inside that 5-gallon bucket, that'll give you about 5, almost 8 degrees protection from frost and freezes overnight. Okay, but you have to remember that that's blocking out all light for your plant, and so you're going to want to, that has to come off. It's a short-term fix. Okay, if it stays under a bucket too long, it's going to have to damage the plant because it's not getting enough sunlight. If you do any gardening in containers, I do a little bit of container gardening, mostly for my citrus. I've got a couple of citrus trees. When it comes time for a frost or a freeze at night, I'll take those, roll them into my garden, or out of the garden into the house or the garage, and then I can go ahead and pull them back out the next day once the temperatures warm back up. This keeps them with enough sunlight to actually keep growing, but it keeps them protected from the really cold weather. So, any questions? Okay, long term, this is for stretches, especially if you're talking a couple of nights or a couple of days worth of cold. There's a couple of ways we can work on this. First one's going to be a location. You do a garden like right up against the south wall of your house, especially if you've got a brick or stone house. The sunlight will come in, hit those bricks in winter, absorb into that brick, and then slowly radiate out over time, especially in the cold nights. And you can increase the temperature right there, right next to the wall, by 4 or 5 degrees a lot of times. Okay, that can really help protect some tender plants. So that's one of the easy ways to do it, if you've got a good spot to do that on. Next one is hoops and greenhouses. Now, when we're talking hoops, this is what we're looking at usually. There's a couple of different varieties. This is the cheap, you know, DIY version. It's 1/2-inch PVC piping, basically stuck in the ground. You could either do it on, you know, either stick it in the ground like I've done here because it's in my raised bed and it's soft soil. The other option is just to do a small stake of rebar, you know, 3/8 rebar goes in the ground and you can just set the hoop right on top of it. On top of these, you can then put your frost cloth or your blankets on it or plastic. So if it's a short-term overnight fix, this works real well, especially if you've got a plant that's, you know, 1.5 feet, 2 foot tall. This hoop will keep the whatever you have on it to block the cold temperatures. It'll keep up off of that plant so you don't have any problems with the, say, plastic and against that, freezing the leaves of your plant also. So the other thing you can do is with plastic and make like a mini greenhouse. The one problem with that is when you hit about 50 degrees in a greenhouse even this size, you start cooking your plants inside. The temperature inside that little mini hoop greenhouse will hit 90 or 100 degrees a lot of times in summer or in winter times. So it's amazing how well it works. So you need to go ahead and have it opened up on a daily basis if you're using plastic. So you can buy these commercially. A lot of times they're called caterpillar tunnels. They're usually, you know, foot and a half tall, a couple of feet wide, and do the same basic thing. And you can just they've got small wire hoops instead of the plastic, and you just drive them into the ground. So you can go with a full greenhouse. This is one DIY version that I did back in Midland. This one's about 22 feet wide by about 30 feet long. As you can see, I have tomatoes in here. This is the week before Christmas, the year that I put this up. And can't really see it on here, but right there is a nice, beautiful red tomato. And we'd been having freezing temperatures for about 6 weeks at this point. We had tomatoes on Christmas Day that were beautiful and healthy. The problem is the day after Christmas, we had 6 inches of heavy, wet snow. And while it didn't break the greenhouse, it did collapse it, and it just kind of folded in. And then all of these posts that I had holding up the tomato plants punched right through the plastic. So a lot of the tomatoes took a lot of damage. They still gave a little bit of fruit, but not nearly as bad, as much as they had been. But it still held up pretty good. Now, Danielle, you had a question?
I was just wondering how tall that was?
It was close to, I think, 12 foot in the center. Yeah. It's just a simple straight hoop up and over. The raised garden beds was actually what I used for the edging on this. I just stuck the pipe down on the cinder block wall I had here, and then on the outside, on the other side, I just used rebar that I stuck the poles on. So, yes, sir. The hoops were made out of PVC. They work well, but you understand that PVC does fade or does get brittle in the sun. So something like this is going to have to be replaced probably about every 3 years for a frame if you really want to. But it's not real expensive. At the time, this hoop house I think was under $500 complete. That's plastic and PVC. The plastic I would not recommend as is. It's the painter's plastic that you can get over at any of the big box stores. It's a little bit too opaque for a lot of the sunlight. It still worked well. I was still getting fruit, but they weren't. The tomatoes were struggling a little bit with sunlight, so that was the one problem I had on it. So yes, ma'am. Did I have to roll it up or not? No, I did not. I did have a couple of doors on this so that I could get some breezeway up to it. The back wall over here I did roll up occasionally, just a little bit, just to get some airflow in there. But I think because it was so opaque, it didn't get nearly as hot as it could have. So I was, and like I said, that time frame, it was actually a pretty cool winter. So we weren't really getting a lot of hot temperatures. So, but the plants were loving it in there. I was trying to plant in the same greenhouse. I was trying to plant lettuces, broccoli, and the tomatoes, and it didn't work real well because it was either too hot or too cold. Yes, sir.
Was it positioned north, southeast?
When we're looking at it, this direction is north-south, okay, which is how they suggest that we build them around here. Yes, ma'am.
What do you do about heat at night when it got cool?
For the most part, because it is such a big volume of air and it was sealed off, unless it was dropping to about 25, I usually didn't do anything. It could hold the temperature in there 6-8 degrees, usually above the outside temperature, so I wasn't too worried about it. I did for a while, especially because there was a couple of really cold nights, I just threw a little small space heater in there, and because most of the stuff that I was worried about was in this one end of this one bed, I basically had another bed like this right next to it, and I just took that space heater right there and just had it blast across to the tomatoes, just to keep them warm. After that, everything else in there could handle a light frost. So, other questions? One of these days, Master Gardeners will be doing a class on greenhouses. I don't know when. It's just one of those subjects we don't hit a whole lot of, but we do need to. So, one thing to think about when we're talking about gardening, this is sort of a little off topic, but it's not. Rotational gardening, trying to move your crops around so that you don't get buildup of disease or pest problems. The problem is in a small urban style garden, you don't have a whole lot of room to rotate. But you can do it if you do it with at least three beds that you can rotate through. And this is a big problem around here because we have both fall and winter crops that we're trying to rotate through, multiple seasons, with multiple beds, very short number of beds. the big problem that I have with when I'm growing, I basically grow four varieties of, or four main families of crops. I do nightshades. Nightshades includes peppers, tomatoes, potatoes, and eggplant. And that's a lot of what a lot of people like to grow. So that's one family of plants. The next family of plants that I love to grow is cubits. Cucumbers, squash, melons, pumpkins, all those sorts of things. All of those are in the same family. And that counts for about 90% of most of my summer garden. So I have a hard time rotating. The other two crops that I rotate through is legumes, which would be like peas and beans. And then the other one is what they call cole crops, which would be a lot of your leafy greens, the kale, spinach, lettuce. Those things can kind of go wherever, whenever you need to in your rotation. But this is one of those things you need to think about to try and at least alleviate some of the pest and parasite and virus problems that you might get in your beds. Okay, keep studying. One of these books are pretty good. I got pictures of them there. The one in the middle right here is a very good quality book, especially for first-time gardeners. This is the copy that the library has. It is available to whoever decides to rumble up here and grab it. Please don't be like the last person that did it. For the spring class that I gave on this in January, they ordered in the copy of the book for me. It was destroyed by June. Okay? Please take care of the books if you check them out from the library. They had to order that one again for me this time. So, but it's available for checkout. So that one's a pretty good one. Here, the Square Foot Gardening does a lot of good information also. Greg Grant does a very good job on his. The one big thing about Greg's is it also does a lot of fruit production in it also. And he is from Texas, so he understands some of our weather problems. He's out of Houston or Dallas, I can't remember which. Tyler? Okay, so East Texas, so that's all that matters. It's east. So he's got, a little bit different problems than we do. He's got acid soil, he's got, lots of rain, and we have just the opposite. So, but a lot of his stuff dealing with temperatures and stuff is going to work well too. The two on the right are a little bit more advanced. If you're going to pick ones, I'd pick any of these three. And once you've finished up and grown for a little bit, I could recommend those two as very good gardening sources also to extend your knowledge. Now, as for resources, when we were talking about varieties, the site right here is a wonderful website with lots and lots of good information on it. It has both not only the vegetables, but it's got fruits, nuts, ornamentals, lawn, all sorts of information that we can learn from. Okay, specifically on the vegetables, there's a section in there. You can click on a link to look for varieties by county. So you can go in there, pull the drop-down menu. I'm in Taylor, Jones, Callahan County, whatever it may be in. Go ahead and select that, and then just tell them to print out all the varieties. All the varieties that we get around here that are highly recommended by A&M fits on about 4 pages. So it's not too bad. The ones that I had in Midland, we had a page and a half. So we have a lot better weather to grow stuff here, but it still have to worry about a lot of our heats and colds and that sort of stuff. Farmer's Almanac will have a lot of information. Some of the stuff in the Farmer's Almanac, A&M doesn't particularly suggest that you follow, things like phases of the moon and that sort of stuff for planting. But, they've been doing it for, a couple thousand years, so it can't be too far off. It's just they haven't figured out the science behind it. So YouTube and Facebook for the Master Gardeners, we have both sets. They do, if you hit us up on those sites, you can ask us questions if need be and talk to either myself or some of the other vegetable specialists that we do have in-house that we can answer your questions. So the other website that we have is the Big Country Master Gardeners main webpage. This will highlight things like upcoming events like these talks. Also, it'll let you know the information on the fall plant sale and then the spring plant sale when it comes around. So, any questions? Is that?
When is the plant sale here in fall?
October 15th.
Where?
It will be at the Expo Center in the Modern Living Mall, which is the one that kind of looks like Whataburger.
The website will be up that whole week. We'll have it online and in person on Saturday.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. The way we've been doing our plant sales recently, we will do online web sales for pickup on Saturday, and then on Saturday we'll have an open house plant sale with everything we've got left that you can come in and talk to master gardeners at the same time. Yes, ma'am.
Can you address bugs in the fall, like squash bugs? Are they as bad or?
That's the nice thing about fall gardening. I've given up squash plants in the spring because of squash bugs. They are just horrendous, and there's no way to get rid of them easily. In the fall, it's not the main season, so squash bug pressure will be reduced drastically in the fall if you do fall planting. Now, fall planting for squash can actually have started a month ago, and anything after about July starts working really well. So, but you don't have nearly the pest pressures a lot of times because it's not the normal cycle for them. So, yes, sir.
Talk about pests, what you do about your grasshoppers?
Grasshoppers. What I do with grasshoppers is I have turkeys and chickens. Now I try to keep the chickens out of the garden because there's a joke among gardeners that you see a class on gardening with chickens. No, that doesn't work. The chickens will destroy your garden in a matter of hours. So you keep the chickens out. Turkeys aren't nearly as bad. They don't scratch as much. They just go after the bugs. So guineas will do the same. The problem is in town you really can't do that so much. There are some chemicals out there that you can work on it to help prevent some of the grasshoppers. The other thing to do is if you have tall grass nearby, that's usually where the grasshoppers like to congregate and breed, and then they'll come into your nice tasty plants. So you want to try and keep the grass, even those next to you, at a lower level. That helps. And then the other thing is if you have attract birds to your property, just the standard songbirds and that sort of stuff, those are the natural pests of the grasshoppers. So if you can build a nice oasis for your birds, they'll come in, they'll take out the grasshoppers, but unfortunately they also do like things like strawberries, tomatoes, that sort of stuff. So, other questions? Yes, ma'am. Tomato hornworms. Tomato hornworms are kind of cool. They do not, they're almost impossible to find during the day. You'll suddenly come out to one of your tomato plants and it's half stripped of leaves. It's probably a tomato hornworm. Overnight, they've just absolutely wiped out a plant. They will get to be nice and big and fat and juicy before you can usually find them. Usually when you find out you've had them is either you've got leaves stripped from your plant or you've got caterpillar poo laying around your plants, which kind of look like rabbit poo. It's kind of a small little pellet. The best way to find hornworms is at nighttime, believe it or not, with UV light. You come out with UV light and the hornworms glow depending on the exact color that you have on the UV light. They'll either fluoresce completely so that they just like pop out and you can spot them. You can spot them when they're this big and there's no way you're going to be able to find them unless you do it that way. Or if you don't have quite the right color light, the tomato plant will be one color and the hornworm will be a different color. But they actually do stand out really well comparatively. So that's one of the best things for looking for hornworms. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
This says sheet 1.
It's fun.
It's supposed to have another.
No, that's it. It's just the 2 pages. So, for those of you that are wondering, the sheet that she held up was the dates, planting dates. We did not have a complete. Oh, we do have extra copies if you did not get one now. And so in the back. So, yes, ma'am.
Worms. How do you keep worms here in Texas?
Keep the soil moist. Moist soil is what the worms need. If it dries out too much, they dry out and it kills them. If it gets too wet, they drown, and because they breathe through their skin. So keeping your soil moist but not wet. During long periods of time, like the droughts that we normally get, some form of a mulch on top of the soil will help keep that soil moist. The only problem you have to have is make sure that the soil can drain or it doesn't get real soggy when we do get our 2 or 3 inches of rain.
When you're irrigating your tomato plants, how long do you irrigate at one time?
Okay, irrigating tomato plants. The key thing on tomato plants is that you do consistent watering. Spikes in the water flow on the tomato plants will cause the fruits to expand very quickly. This causes cracking and splitting, which rots out a lot of times on your plants. So that's what you want to try and avoid. As for how much, I believe it's about 1.5 inches of water per week. However that works. Now, if you've got sandy soil, you may have to do that very often, like every day or every other day, a little bit to make up for that. If it's more of a clay soil, you just want to make sure that soil is still nice and moist, and that'll probably be, you won't have to put quite as much moisture into it. If you have mulch on top of it, you don't have to water quite as much because there's less loss to evaporation. So it all depends on where you're at for the soil. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
What about planting asparagus?
Asparagus is usually planted in the spring, or I'll say winter here. Usually about February is when we're supposed to be planting asparagus. Do understand that asparagus will take you at least 1 year, if not 2 or 3, to actually get from seed or crown or however you plant it till you actually start getting asparagus. And usually the first year, you only get to harvest like 1 or 2 shoots per plant, if that. And then it's good. But asparagus, once you plant it, you don't have to plant it again for another 15 or 20 years usually.
Yeah, they're great.
Yeah.
Just a little time.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
My mother used to plant flowers around the garden.
Okay.
Is that true?
Flowers around the garden is a very good thing to do. It attracts pollinators for those plants that actually do need to pollinate, things like any of the fruiting plants like tomatoes, squash, that sort of stuff. Need pollinators in there to pollinate your plant. So that's a very good thing to do. Some plants will help attract beneficial bugs. Other plants will attract the bad bugs, but they attract all the bad bugs away from your vegetable plants a lot of times, and use them as a trap crop. Some plants will actually go in and actually produce chemicals that will drive away other bugs that you don't want. So flower garden and interspersing with your vegetable garden is actually a very good, useful thing to do. And if you go back and look at my Vegetable 101 garden video, that there's some discussion in there about that. Other questions? All right. Well, no more questions then. Oh, yes, ma'am.
What about before it starts to get cold? When is the best time to put down like mulch for your flower beds?
Best time to put down mulch is today.
Today.
Especially today actually works well because we've had all this moisture. The top layer has finally had a chance to dry out a bit to get some mud off. And now you can just put that mulch on there and it'll help retain that moisture. And the one thing to think about is depending on how bad your weeds were in the garden. I know I've got a beautiful backyard right now that is beautiful and green, and it's all broadleaf weeds. I can tell. There's almost no grass coming back out. It's all weeds. So, use a hoe and just kind of do a quick hoe if you've got a bunch of weed seeds coming up, and then put your mulch down. So, yes. Oh, and we do have a little bit of a question.
For your fall garden, do you need to do any feeding of it or anything?
Just your normal feeding that you would do on any vegetable gardening. A general It should be based off of any soil sample that you have, so that would be the first thing to look at. But you also just a general broad, 10-10-10 type fertilizer would not be a bad thing, depending on what you're planting also. Some plants will take more of one type of a nutrient than the other, and the problem that a lot of people have is they'll put a lot of nitrogen down when they put their tomatoes down, and you end up with a very big, bushy tomato plant that doesn't produce anything, because it's all going to the green and not to the fruits. So just kind of think of what the plant needs and make sure it's got enough of those nutrients. So, okay, any other questions?
Cover crops. If you're doing a fall garden, do you need to put down cover crops?
You have to, because the garden itself is the cover crop. So, okay.